My name is Bernice Gray, and I live now in North Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and of course that's where my memories of World War II are from. We didn't have TV. We had a radio, and the radio was located in what was the dining room of a row house in southeast Washington. Of course, nowadays it's a very highfalutin neighborhood. It's called Capitol Hill, and they're called townhouses, but it was a little tiny row house, and my mother and father and I lived with my grandparents. So my grandparents used to have couches in this dining room, and they slept there, but that was kind of where I spent a lot of my time. And I can remember sitting by the radio with my grandfather and listening to the news from overseas about Hitler invading the various countries and the imminence of war. War is coming, you know, it's dark, it's gloomy. And I can remember being very frightened of that. As a matter of fact, I was more frightened of that, I think, than when war was actually declared, because the reports were so ominous about what was going on in Europe. My memories of the war are really how it affected us on a daily basis. One thing I really remember was the air raid wardens and the blackout curtains that we had to have, and how if the air raid warden could see light outside, he'd come and knock on your door, and you'd have to turn your lights off. And of course, they were bombing London at that time, and fortunately, never happened to us. But you know, you never knew when it was going to happen. I can remember we had ration books, and you only had so many coupons for things like sugar and meat and shoes. I can remember Dad didn't take the car out of the garage very often because you couldn't get tires for it. My father wasn't in the war. He worked for the Navy Yard in Washington, and so that was kind of a job where he did his war. He was a little bit older than the young men that they were drafting, but still, and one of our neighbors also worked there, so that was a very serious work that they did. One of my jobs as a kid was, at that time they came out with oleo because you couldn't get butter. And when you got this white blob of stuff that looked kind of like, if you're familiar with Crisco or lard, you got this white blob. And my job as a kid, you got a little capsule that looked like a pill, and it had sort of a yellowish orange food coloring in it. So my job was to take that oleo and sort of knead it until you got it to look like butter. And I can remember doing that. I can remember saving grease, and if you didn't use all the grease, like bacon grease or anything, you couldn't get anything. You couldn't buy anything. So you kept what you needed, and then you turned in what you didn't use. Also, you turned in tin foil. Everybody back then smoked, except me. I was too young, but everybody smoked, and you saved the tin foil that were in the cigarette packages. And I can remember we used to make if you had a rubber band, you'd make these rubber band balls, and you'd turn those in. You collected scrap metal. And it was amazing. Everybody on the home front was working together. That's the thing I remember. We were all working for this common cause. This is very unpolitically correct, but you were working to defeat those, as we called them, Japs, and those Nazis. And and there were things like, signs all over the place, loose lips, sink ships, and things like that. And you'd go to the movies, and there'd be an interval in the movie where an actor would come on screen and beg you to buy war bonds. You could buy bonds kids in school had books, and they would buy a 25-cent stamp a week, fill out the book, and then when the book was full, you traded it in for I believe it was 1875 war bond, and then as it matured, it became a $25 bond. And I can remember that being a big thing. I remember saving that. I was amazed. We have some ration books still, and we hadn't used all of them. That sort of surprised me. I remember a lot of the songs back then, and one of them that's, talking about the air raid wardens and the lights being out. No lights shining at night or anything. And one of the popular songs was When the Lights Come On Again All Over the World. And they were just people that just remember people working together. Now, we didn't have nightly news that showed us everything that happened every day in the war, but I can remember seeing newsreels in the movies, because we went to the movies a lot. We didn't have TV, we just had radio, and movies were like 10 to 25 cents, so we went to the movies a lot, and you didn't have to worry if they were all right for the children. They were all PG, I guess, then we didn't rate them. But I can remember that the horrible scenes. That's a vivid memory too. When the troops went in and freed the prisoners in the German concentration camps, and walking skeletons walked out in what looked like pajamas. I mean, it was just unreal. And how wonderful it was on VE Day when they declared the war over in Europe. And then we went on to the war in the Pacific, and Harry Truman dropping the atomic bomb, and then finally the war was over in Japan, and what a wonderful time that was. One of the big things I remember happening is women who had always just been at home. They went to work, they took the men's places, and that's where we heard about Rosie the Riveter, and women started wearing slacks, which is probably unknown to women today, that, we didn't wear slacks before that. I mean, I remember as a child having one pair of slacks probably, I guess, during the wartime. But they were only worn on very, very outdoor occasions when you were playing on the swing or something like that. But, and Washington became a busy city. Going back to the war bonds, I can remember that they would come through tours of Hollywood stars. And as a kid, you'd be so excited seeing all these people in person that you just idolized. And they were trying to get you to buy the war bonds. Sometimes think maybe we ought to start that again for our economy. The house we lived in, we rented it. And my grandmother just said, now I'm talking what now today is Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. My grandmother said, no one would ever pay the price for this house that they are asking. Now, this was a little house, 3 floors. Well, that counted the basement. And they were asking $10,000 for it. And Grandma said nobody would be foolish enough to pay that for that house. I had an uncle who served in, he was in New Guinea, and he served out in the Pacific and in the Army. And I remember when he came home and all the family gathering, and how excited we were for him to come home. But as I say, my father didn't serve, but he worked for the Navy Yard and did his share. In our neighborhood, I don't think we had any servicemen. Like I say, the neighbors that I was the closest to, he also worked at the Navy Yard, so in Washington, Southeast Washington. So that was a big thing in that area. I guess that's why they all lived in that area, because you probably could walk to the Navy Yard if you were so inclined, from where I lived. It's hard for people to understand, but I was born and raised in Washington, and I would say, really, up until the 60s, Washington was a small southern town. Now, there was a great influx of government employees starting during the war and after the war in the 50s. But you still, the high schools were in sections of the town. There was a central high school, there was an eastern high school, so forth. And in our group of friends, it seems like even if you didn't know a person from another high school, you knew someone who knew them. So it was a small, small town. You could be down walking the streets in Washington, D.C., and at 10 o'clock at night by yourself. I mean, I did. After I got out of high school, I went to a business college in downtown Washington, and you were perfectly safe. I mean, I never thought twice about walking to the bus stop or anything like that. But then Washington filled up and enlarged, and then it seems like everybody became a transient. I was one of the rarities. It was a native-born Washingtonian of native-born Washingtonians, so I was rare in that aspect. Everyone worked together. I mean, there were, like I say, scrap metal drives that you tried to do better. Competitions, you tried to do better than everybody else, but everybody had one common goal, and that was to win this war and to support our men at home. One of the things I remember too, I had forgotten about, and I think I've seen it even with the war that's going on now. The Gold Star mothers. Women would mothers would have hanging a flag in their windows, and it would denote how many children they had in the war. I mean, they might have 3 blue stars or whatever. Then if a child was killed, they would become a Gold Star mother. They would hang, and they were, not that they wanted to lose their child, but they were proud of that why the child died. And I remember the case, I believe it was the Sullivans, where the family lost 5 sons. And I believe after that, they didn't allow, believe all 5 of them were aboard a ship. And after that, they wouldn't allow a whole family like that to serve together, although these boys had wanted to serve together. But everybody just worked so hard together, and as politically incorrect as it is, I mean, everybody, you just hated the Germans and you hated the Japanese. I mean, they were barbarians. And the things that came out about them, you just couldn't believe. I mean, people just didn't act that way. And you were always watching to see, you were watching for spies, and it just everybody worked so hard together. And I think that was the important thing. I think the only thing I've seen close to that, and it really still didn't equal it, was 9/11. You saw everybody come together. Well, during the war, everybody was together. They were together to win the war. They were together to celebrate the end of the war. They were together to welcome the troops home and help the troops when they did come home. We had air raid drills, and that I remember even more than the air raid drills, of course. Now this goes a little bit beyond the war, is, you know, when the atomic bomb came in, then having to get under your desk and what you did when the atomic, in case there was an atomic attack. No, I mean, never. I don't ever, if a person said anything that was unpatriotic, I mean, well, you'd probably turn them in to the FBI because they'd probably be, what did they say back then, a fascist or whatever, you know. I mean, you just didn't do that. I mean, you'd probably be, people weren't violent back then, but you'd probably gotten beaten up on the street. I mean, no, everybody that I knew, we were really supportive. I mean, it just, nobody fought the war, nobody criticized the president for the way he ran the war. You just supported totally what was going on. And of course, I guess I remember even more than President Roosevelt, I remember Winston Churchill, you know, and his V for victory and his cigar. I think those are two things I really remember about Winston Churchill, but how he brought England together. I remember the poster of Uncle Sam wants you, you know, and he's pointing, and I remember another song I remember is don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I come marching home. And there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. I don't know if you remember or not Spike Jones, but he used to have a song, I can't remember all the words, but he used to have a song about the Japs. I mean, he actually used that expression that today probably couldn't get on the air because it was so unpolitically correct. I mean, he was just outrageous, but that's the way everybody felt. And music was very important, and the Andrews Sisters, I remember them very much, you know, singing in their uniforms, and then the music really was important to me. Oh, the war bond rallies, I remember one big one we had down by the Washington Monument. And I remember, I think, this probably sounds silly for a kid, but one of my favorite stars that I idolized was Greer Garson. And she was there with her flaming red hair. And I was so thrilled to see her. And, and another thing, the movie stars, some of them that went into the service, would make little films that would come out in the middle of movies, you know, the short subjects. You went to the movies then, you didn't just see the movie. You saw the movie, you saw a cartoon, you saw the newsreel, and you might see a short subject. And they would always be, you know, pro-Army, pro-Navy, whatever, or some type of story. But then you would see Clark Gable was at one of those war bond rallies, and Merle O'Brien, and people today probably don't even know who those people were, but you know, back then. And as a kid, I loved the movies, and still do, as a matter of fact, but there's a lot of them I don't see now because I don't like the language, but I just wish we could impart to people today what a wonderful country this is. My daughter homeschools my grandchildren, and she had asked me to write something for them about World War II. And that's one of the things I tried to impart to them, that this was a great country and it was a great country under God, which is also politically incorrect to say nowadays, but that this is what we're here for, and our job is to pass it on, to help our fellow man. And I just think we've gotten so far away from that. And this time, like I say, during the war and again 9/11, I think we saw some of that. And I think we saw a little bit of it the other day when that plane landed in the Hudson. But very, very little. We just don't see enough of that. And we're almost ashamed to admit that, it really touches us and how important it is.